I'm Chris Reiger at the National Rifle Association. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to members. I wanted to start by naming a couple things that we have issues with in the bill. I obviously don't have time to go over all 44 sections like my friend Senator Latz did, but there are a number of things in the what I would call the Latz gun control bill that have a lot of concerns for myself and my membership. First, in Section 10, I noticed that they don't use the full ATF regulatory definition of ammunition, and that's something that might be interested to take a look at. I'm not sure why that wasn't included. I don't think that the County Attorneys Association had an issue with that provision that was in the Ortman and Hillstrom bill. In Section 16, I noticed that Senator Latz gets rid of the term judicial determination and talks about individuals who are ineligible to possess a firearm based on an involuntary hospitalization. I guess the concern there would be, are we talking about individuals who perhaps are on a 72-hour hold, in which case that would be considered a involuntary confinement. Those people would be released from that hold, and based on the language I see here, they would probably be prohibited from possessing a firearm. In Section 21, I think what Senator Latz is trying to do there is again take apart from the Hillstrom-Ortman bill that deals with the implementation of the NICS Improvements Amendment Act, and he does not actually capture all of the necessary components to make Minnesota compliant with the federal law. And I think that that would be something that is better handled actually in the Ortman and Hillstrom bill. In Section 24, we've got a concern there because what's going on there, we're talking about a transferee, making the transferee permit from a shall issue state to a may issue state. Right now there are over 30 states that don't require their citizens to have to beg the government for a permit just to possess a firearm in their own home. And what we're doing here is we're going the complete opposite direction. Rather than moving away from a permit system and strengthening the background check system so there isn't a duplication between the chiefs of police and the FFLs that also do background checks, we're making a system where, based on past police contacts, we're going to be denying somebody a fundamental right. And we can't quite tell because there's no definition of what past police contacts could mean. We're not talking about any types of charges, any types of convictions. It's merely you could have been an ornery teen, and all of a sudden the local chief of police has a foul on you. Now you're going to be denied a permit to exercise a fundamental right. So that's obviously a concern of ours. In Section 25, we see the arbitrary increase from 5 to 7 days to process a permit, and even allow up to 30 days.
Sorry, you got about 15 seconds left on your 3 minutes, unless somebody else is going to forfeit that for you.
We have 20 minutes, right?
Madam Chair?
Senator Limmer.
Didn't the proponents have 20 minutes?
We're
And they could divide that time any way they want?
Oh, absolutely, and so can they.
Why are you limiting him to 3 minutes, Madam Chair?
Because I want to know. I just asked the question, Senator Limmer. If he wants to stop in 3 minutes, or if he wants somebody else to forfeit their time. I don't know what they've got planned.
Madam Chair, I think that we might have only 3 testifiers.
Thank you.
So I think that
then you can go ahead.
All right, appreciate that. Thank you. I was talking about the arbitrary increase from 5 to 7 days for the processing of a permit to a transferee permit, and then allowing potentially up to 30 days because you can't identify somebody. So I could see a lot of room there for there to be chiefs of police and maybe sheriffs who just go ahead and use that full 30 days and basically create a 30-day waiting period. Then we'll get into the main thrust of the Latz. The Latz gun control bill is the quote-unquote universal background checks or the private sales bans. This part of the bill would unnecessarily abolish private transfers of handguns and certain semi-automatic rifles. This would prohibit the now lawful trades and sales between your hunting buddy, your buddy down at the local gun club, or even certain members of your family. And it also impose a new $25 fee on each transfer. And there's also a situation where you can only borrow your buddy's hunting rifle for 72 hours. So let's use an example of what we're talking about there. You have an individual who goes, borrows his friend's Beretta or Benelli shotgun and decides to go down to Louisiana to shoot some mallards. And he's obviously going to be there for more than 72 hours. So when he goes to borrow his friend's shotgun, he has to do a background check and pay $25. And then when his friend comes back with that firearm, he has to do a background check, do $25. and you have to organize to meet up at that gun shop or an FFL. That's obviously an unnecessary burden on law-abiding folks. It was mentioned that 70% of the public here in Minnesota support universal background checks, and I think that really goes to the question that's asked in that poll. And if you would ask people what they thought about having to ban the occasional sale of a firearm between their best friends or their hunting buddies, I think you get quite a different answer. Or if you'd ask them what they thought about instituting a universal registration scheme, because otherwise the universal background check system is useless, they'd probably have a different opinion on that. It was also mentioned that there's the private sales loophole. Here in America, it's always been allowed to occasionally sell or trade or borrow a firearm, obviously within the scope of the state and federal laws. Private sales are the exception, and they aren't the rule. Research shows that we're talking about likely less than 10% of firearms are sold without background checks. It's also important to note that firearm ownership is at an all-time high right now in America, and violent crime is at an all-time low. To speak specifically to the universal background checks, they aren't universal. By the plain terms of the bill that Senator Latz has put together, there are people that are exempted from those background checks. I think it's pretty obvious to note that criminals aren't going to all of a sudden submit themselves to background checks because there's expanded checks now. So you're creating a regulatory scheme that only burdens the law-abiding citizens that are already doing background checks. It's also not surprising that despite extensive research, there's no study that has shown that expanded background checks would lead to a reduction in violent crime. In fact, the universal background checks would not only be an inconvenience for law-abiding citizens, the delays and complications could lead to increases in violent crime. Like I mentioned, the universal background checks are unenforceable and would likely have to lead to registration. The Obama administration in January 2013 study actually admitted that the effectiveness of universal background checks depends on requiring gun registration. So, and the reason that is because the whole point of this expanded check or this private sales ban is to track the transfer of firearms, and you can't track the transfer of firearms if you don't have any type of paper trail. And without state law enforcement doesn't have the ability to access the NICS background check system unless there's a bona fide criminal investigation. So basically, you're instituting this scheme that will only impact the law-abiding. I think it's also important to note that it's already a felony to be engaged in the business of buying and selling firearms and ammunition without having a federal firearms dealer's license. It's already a crime for a federally licensed dealer to sell a gun without doing a background check. It's already a felony to sell, trade, give, lend, rent, or transfer a gun to a person you know or should have known is not legally allowed to own, purchase, or possess a firearm. And the penalty for selling to a person who is a criminal, a mentally ill, mentally incompetent, or an alcohol or drug abuser is a 10-year felony. So I think it's important to point out that criminalizing private transfers through a system of so-called universal background checks would not have prevented any of the tragedies that have spurred the call for this legislation. Even if accomplished by change to create universal registration, most criminals' possession of firearms would remain outside of such a system. So I think it's important as members of this committee review this legislation, we also take a look at the Senator Ortman's bill that I know that Senator Latz and others have collaborated on as well, and take notice that there are over 100 members of this body that have supported that legislation, and I think it's worthy of the discussion that they'll get tonight and a consideration on the floor that I'll likely get. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rieger.